The Looney Tunes show from 2011 to 2013 was a disaster, and I really am very annoyed that people keep praising it and acting like it was this underrated gem of a show that got canceled too early, all this bullshit. And just hear me out, I'm going to explain why. The show would have been fine on its own if all the characters were literally replaced with a completely different looking character, and say it wasn't the Looney Tunes show, but all the characters were replaced with just other random characters, other random human characters, then the show would be perfectly fine. Then it would just show how it really is its own thing. It's nothing like the Looney Tunes. I mean, it's barely like the Looney Tunes. It was basically their attempt to change the humor of the Looney Tunes, like make them quote-unquote modern, and basically trying to reinvent what the Looney Tunes is. Like, reinvent the Looney Tunes. It had an attitude like, the old Looney Tunes stuff is so offensive, so it can't be around anymore, and it's not relatable to people anymore. So it's gotta go for the most part, which is ridiculous. The Looney Tunes are timeless because they were crude. The kind of subtle, silly, over-the-top, maniacal rudeness and sarcasm the old Looney Tunes had in the old cartoons, and even some of the sleaziness they had, all of that shit is what makes it relatable to people. All that, like, subtle, kind of dark and sadistic stuff about getting whacked with hammers, or, you know, getting hit with a boulder, and how the characters, you saw them in so many desperate situations, and because they all almost seemed like they were superhuman, they can just get right the fuck back up and, you know, whack someone in the head. All that anger they had, the angst, all that, like, subtle, dark shit about human nature, that's what's relatable about the old Looney Tunes. That's why people loved them. And I know, like, that stuff, some of that stuff is really fucked up. A lot of it was. And that's what's relatable about it. It's just, you know, it's entertainment. But there was subtlety to the original Looney Tunes that I think most modern people, most modern young kids don't understand. Because one of the criticisms towards the Looney Tunes show was that it didn't have the slapstick the original cartoons did. While that's true, the Looney Tunes show did have some slapstick, but it was just like a little bit. It wasn't nowhere near as funny or comedically timed like the old cartoons were. Plus, the old cartoons weren't all slapstick. That's what people who say this don't understand. Yes, there was a lot of slapstick, you know, people hitting people with shit and hitting each other and all that, but there was also subtle humor too. There was like word timing and like word play where the characters try to trick each other. There's also like a really interesting subtle like idea going on in the concepts of a lot of the cartoons. Like the episode where it's Bugs versus the opera singer. Like he's trying to practice singing and Bugs keeps playing his like guitar by his rabbit hole, and then he gets annoyed, and then he walks over to where he is, and he like beats him up with it. Then Bugs does it again, and then Bugs is basically pissed off, so he gets revenge on him, makes him like sing like a madman until he's like blue and green in the face, and then the rock hits him, and he whatever, which is hilarious. But what people don't realize is that the beginning of the short, it makes you wonder who's actually wrong there. Was it Bugs? Or was it the opera singer? I think his name was Giovanni or something. It's like, yeah, was, Bugs, you could say Bugs was being an asshole because he was playing music when he was practicing. But then again, you could say the opera singer was a douchebag because instead of going over and asking him, hey, can you please stop, I'm trying to practice, he just beat the shit out of him. So it's like, who's really wrong? That kind of stuff was in the Looney Tunes, the old cartoons, all the time. Where it was like, who was wrong? Was it Elmer hunting Bugs? Was he wrong because he's hunting him? Or was Bugs wrong because he was doing something else to Elmer or whatever? It's like they were always trying to like take advantage of the situation, and like the lines were blurred. It was like gray area of who's wrong and who's right. And that's the kind of subtlety that was in the old Looney Tunes. So it wasn't just all slapstick. The people just assume, they just say like the typical thing of what like most people just think the Looney Tunes were. But no, the longer you watch them, you see that kind of shit. So people compliment the Looney Tunes show and think it had something interesting that was different or even better than the original shorts because they say the Looney Tunes show had the Looney Tunes be more relatable, more down to earth. Yes, but like I explained a second ago when I gave examples, the original Looney Tunes were already relatable. They already had things that made them weird, quirky, down to earth. They had all that shit. Just because they were silly doesn't mean that there wasn't any layering to what made them so special. So the Looney Tunes show does have the characters be down to earth, but it's fucking boring. And yes, I have to admit, I will give the Looney Tunes show 3 compliments, even though I think it's a bad show. I do actually like the version of Lola Bunny in the show. I thought she was entertaining. I thought she was cute. I prefer the original version of Lola, and it is kind of interesting that the version of Lola in the Looney Tunes show is so different from her original version. But I actually enjoyed Lola in the Looney Tunes show. And then I liked Tina Duck, I think her name was. It was Daffy's girlfriend. She becomes Daffy's girlfriend. So the show had a new character they introduced that was pretty good. One new character that was pretty good, and then Lola was interesting. She was like fun and interesting. At least it was like an interesting idea to do with Lola. But all the other characters are terrible. All these other new versions of the Looney Tunes in the show. And then the third compliment I'll give it is that it is pretty clever in quite a bit of the episodes. Like in some of them, quite a lot of them, there are clever things that happen to the characters, and the writing is actually kind of clever. But that doesn't mean that it's funny. Like something could be clever but not funny. Just because it's clever and, nuanced and has all this like political humor about society and what went on in the 2010s is still going on with everyone being uptight and, who's wrong, who's right. Yeah, like that's clever and it's a little interesting, but that doesn't mean that it's funny. And like the jokes in the show, for the most part, they're pretty poor. Just like there was so much more focus on the down-to-earth stuff, the political stuff, that the humor just, fell to the wayside. It's almost like the show assumes that when it's being clever and political, well, that's all you need. That's the joke. You don't need any more than just, this comment on society. Well, there has to be subtlety. There has to be comedic timing. There has to be things that, make something funny to audiences. The Looney Tunes all had their hilarious comedic quirks in the original versions of them, but they're stripped away in this new one. And even though there are differences to say how Bugs acts in the Looney Tunes show and how Daffy acts and the other characters, like Porky, they're only a little different. They're all not that much different than one another. There's plenty of episodes where Porky would say something that Bugs would say, or Marvin would say something that Daffy would say. Maybe not Daffy, but no, even Daffy. But they're all too similar to one another. And that's the problem with the show. They're trying to make it seem like all the characters are all mostly the same, so it's kind of like real life where most people are kind of typical but have little things that separate them, but that's not what made the Looney Tunes special. The Looney Tunes all had their own distinct personalities. Yes, like the original versions of them are all silly. That's one thing they have in common. After all, they are the Looney Tunes, but they're all loony in their own way. Taz would spin around and he'd, yell and eat anything. Well, Porky was silly, but he didn't do any of that shit. He would stutter, It's just like Witch Hazel in the Looney Tunes show is very boring. She's not silly and over the top, and like she's nothing like her original version. And, you can't completely recreate a character. Like, there has to be some essence of that original character so that the fans, feel like they're watching the same character. They fail on a lot of levels with most of what they did with the Looney Tunes. The only character that's a little bit like the originals is Daffy, because Daffy was always an asshole in the original Looney Tunes. Arguably, somewhat more of an asshole than the other Looney Tunes in the originals. But, again, like, so much was added to Daffy in the Looney Tunes show that was, again, like I said earlier, with the writing and being, interesting. It was a little interesting, but Daffy was not charming as like he used to be. They're all just too calm and subdued in the Looney Tunes show. That's not what the Looney Tunes are at all as characters. They rarely have moments where they will like freak out and do whatever. But it's only when they're like pushed to their very limit. But in the original Looney Tunes, they were very silly a lot of the time. Like Daffy in the old cartoons, he would bounce around and he would screw with people. And even when nothing bad was happening to him, he would just do it anyway because he's like crazy. Well, part of himself is crazy, as a character. And even when they matured Daffy as a character, when he encountered Bugs and they kind of altered him and made him even funnier because like there was subtlety to Daffy now as opposed to him just being silly. When he encountered Bugs, with all the wordplay and all that and the subtlety of like, all that. Even then, they still kept a little bit of his silliness from his earliest cartoons. They still kept it. So they didn't completely redo his character. He was still the same character. They didn't do that with any of the Looney Tunes in the Looney Tunes show. Another complaint by people that didn't like the Looney Tunes show was the animation, and the people that didn't like it said the animation was very poor. And, I think it was okay. I'm not going to be as harsh as other people that disliked it, but I don't think it was just like people who loved the show and thought the animation was good. Like, you guys got to understand, animation was one of the things that made the Looney Tunes so special also. It wasn't just their humor. The old Looney Tunes cartoons, they were so masterfully drawn, and there was so much more effort done into painting the backgrounds, and the animation was better. So they were a spectacle to watch, and it just looked nicer, the older cartoons. The animation was better. A lot of praise was given to the animation of the Looney Tunes. The whole history that they've been around. So, like, to reboot the Looney Tunes and to have it be nowhere even near the kind of animation quality as the ones from the past, it's just, it's kind of jarring. It's pretty jarring. It's also being a little cheap. These are your signature characters for your company, right? So you'd think you'd care more about how they look. It just seemed like they tried to change how they looked to match how this popular art style for cartoons happened in the late 2000s and was going on during the early 2010s. And still going on with, like, the way the animation looks. It's not as good, especially when you compare it to the original way they looked. The Looney Tunes show is not like Star Trek and Arrested Development. Two shows that had like 2 or 3 seasons, then they were canceled, and they were so good that they came back and they had like millions and millions and millions of fans. The Looney Tunes show is not like that. It was never that good, and it actually went on a little too long. If you can't get your shit together by the end of the first season, at least, then, you're almost proving the point that the show is not succeeding and it's not reaching the audience that it wants. And then you have the second season, and it's like, it's still pretty much the same thing. I can't remember, but I think the second season was a little more slapstick, but again, there's some people that say the animation improved from the first season to the second, but it looks pretty much the same to me. The only difference they changed in the animation was changing the skin color of Bugs from the first to the second season. That's really about it. So, another style of humor that got extremely popular during the 2010s was like cringe humor, and I do think some of that stuff is funny. But it has to be, like good comedically timed. Not everything that's just cringe is just automatically funny. That's laziness. Like, sometimes it is, but it's not just a guarantee just because it's cringe. Like, there has to be a subtlety, and, like, it's like a nuanced way to make a cringe joke actually funny, Like, they had all these, like, music videos for each of the Looney Tunes on the Looney Tunes show, I remember. There was a song where Elmer was talking about how he wants to make, like, a cheese sandwich, and it's like, okay, what's funny about that? Like, where's the joke? Like, the way he talks? Like, I don't really understand, like, why is that supposed to be funny? It's almost as if, like, Elmer's music video of him making the sandwich, it's supposed to be cringe. Well, it's so cringy that he's obsessing over making a sandwich. Yeah, but that's not... Okay, where's the joke, though? There's no joke there. I will say, out of all the music videos, and I hated it at the time, but looking back, like, actually, Marvin the Martian's music video, I'm a Martian, it's pretty good. It's the only one that was decent. The only one that was passable. I mean, it's kind of fun to listen to, and it makes the most sense, and I don't know. Like, it's still Marvin being Marvin, and it's nice to see Marvin get, like, a cool music video since he's, like, treated like almost like an underrated Looney Tunes star. Another thing I hated about the Looney Tunes show was what they did to Speedy Gonzales, who is one of my favorite Looney Tunes characters. In the Looney Tunes show, they made Speedy an asshole. In every scene, he's always, like, talking shit to Bugs Bunny or the other characters, but it's not like the way kind of that the Looney Tunes talk shit about each other in the old cartoons. It was just kind of like extra mean and just, like, very cynical and political, too. Like, it's cool he owned his own restaurant or whatever, but it's like Speedy is supposed to be, he's, like, really fast, and he's a hero. In this show, he just owns a restaurant. That's not that exciting compared to someone who is a hero, rescues the cheese, rescues the other mice. It's boring, man. Come on. It's like nothing humorous or funny happened in Speedy's restaurant or with his character. So now it's just some random guy owning a restaurant. It's like there's fucking nothing there, guys.